Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. As the dust settles over President Trump's decisive victory, attention is being drawn to who he will choose for his cabinet. Who are the contenders for possibly the most influential job, that of Secretary of State, and what are they likely to advise Trump to do? Also, how do we expect this decision to influence European politics? Well, to explore these questions, we are joined by Scott Lucas. He's Professor of American Studies at University College in Dublin and a regular contributor. Professor, welcome back to TVP World.
Thank you so much for having me here.
A pleasure as always, sir. Now, let's start with the role of Secretary of State. We hear, shortlists being bandied about. Who's your money on?
I don't think we have a final decision yet, but I think we can learn a lot by the potential candidates from the stories, the leaks given to the media. Let's start with Richard Grenell, who is a devout Trumpist, is a very provocative figure, a very aggressive figure in his rhetoric, and sometimes even in his willingness to pursue misinformation on behalf of Trump. Now, he was ambassador to Germany. He was a very provocative ambassador to Germany at a time when Trump was criticizing Berlin, at a time when Trump was at times trying to undermine Germany and at times NATO. Grenell, and I know this from officials who I've talked to, worked with, he's not an easy person to deal with. He's not someone who pursues cooperation often. He goes more for confrontation. Later on, he covered Trump's back, as it were, by becoming head of Director of National Intelligence on an acting basis at a time when Trump was under a great deal of pressure over his blackmail of Ukraine back in 2019, 2020.
Do you think Grenell, therefore, is the leading candidate for this role, sir?
I think he's one of the leading candidates, and I think he's the one that would raise eyebrows and concern, including in Europe. I'll contrast that with, I think, another leading candidate, Robert O'Brien. Now, Robert O'Brien is very conservative, but he's conservative more in the mold of thinking back to Republicans from Ronald Reagan through George H.W. Bush. He's much more of a pragmatist. He came in, he was special envoy handling hostage negotiations for Trump. But then he became national security advisor after Trump had fired H.R. McMaster, the four-star general, after he had fired John Bolton. And O'Brien's skill was being able to maneuver in that very chaotic Trump White House to avoid getting fired himself, giving public statements to defend Trump, to support Trump, but at the same time, I think being much more pragmatic in America's relationship with its allies and with its adversaries.
Right.
So you've got those two opposites between Grenell and O'Brien, and in the middle, you've got some suggestions of some legislators who might be named. I think Bill Hagerty, the senator from Tennessee, who interestingly has been a supporter of aid to Ukraine. Would that be a positive signal that Trump might not cut off to Ukraine if Hagerty was there? You've got Representative Mike Waltz, who's also supported aid to Ukraine. But then you've got Senator Marco Rubio, the former presidential candidate, who had been supporting aid to Ukraine with conditions, but then 2 days ago took up the line effectively that the Russian invasion of Ukraine, well, this was a stalemate. Ukraine needed to stop fighting because it was losing too many people. In other words, Rubio moving towards that Trump and Vance line, J.D. Vance line, of saying that there need to be talks and these should be on talks of Russia's terms to annex part of Ukraine.
Right. Okay. So much is being made of what Trump has said about NATO and the fact that he would encourage even Putin to invade countries who didn't pay their fair share towards the NATO budget. Was this Trump just being Trump, or do you think he really means it? I mean, when you compare it, for example, to Trump's attitude to Poland, which is paying well above the 2% of GDP that is required.
I think, the starting point to get beyond the specific issue, which I'll talk about in a second, about contributions to NATO, is that Donald Trump is a transactional president, whether it's on domestic issues or foreign policy. If people flatter him, He likes them. He embraces them. He supports them. Witness what Vladimir Putin did yesterday in his congratulations of Trump, precisely to flatter Trump as a courageous man. Putin's counting on Trump to say, "Oh, this is great," and to support Russia's line on Ukraine. If you don't flatter Trump, if you actually criticize his actions or criticize his statements, then he not only dislikes you, he will try to undermine you. And because certain members of NATO, such as Germany, pushed back on Trump, then he went after them. Poland, as you heard in that interview with Mr. Brzezinski, which was fascinating a few minutes ago, Poland is trying that approach of trying to flatter Trump, talk about how it's raised its defense spending precisely to avoid getting the criticism that Trump has aimed at others. Because the fundamental on NATO is that NATO made the commitment in 2014 for members to get to the 2% target. That was before Trump took office. Now, maybe some members were slow on that, but this process of getting to the target and beyond has been something that has occurred within NATO and has been accelerated not by Donald Trump, but by Vladimir Putin and by that invasion of Ukraine, even as Trump is going to try to claim credit for it.
Right. Well, I mean, the other thing Mr. Brzezinski mentioned in his interview, I mean, he drew a parallel, didn't he, between 1930s Germany and today, and UK's, peace in our time, infamous statement, which encouraged Germany to continue its aggression. Do you think a similar situation might arise with Trump with regard to Russia?
Well, I mean, the reality is that we are in this situation. I mean, we are in the situation where Russia is going to try to break international support for Ukraine, to break the military supports, and continue to try to seize territory, especially in the Donbass, which can financial support to weaken Ukraine's government and ability to deliver public services. And Russia wants to get to a point where its annexation of Crimea and the four other Ukrainian regions is recognized by the international community. And I think Trump will support that. That's the risk that we face. Now, when you talk about Mr. Brzezinski and other Polish analysts, they, I think, are taking that line, in fact, reinforcing the line that Ukrainian President Zelensky took at the European summit yesterday, which is peace through strength. That you make that appeal that everyone should have peace through strength, and that Donald Trump should also be hailed for peace through strength. The problem here is, and I think you also heard it in that Brzezinski interview, is that Trump will play divide and rule. He will praise some people and he will try to undermine others. And there's that problem, which is you need to act as a united front. You cannot have Poland saying, well, we've done well. We're at 4.2% of spending, but Germany, they might be a problem, because at that point, that united front is weakened. And I think that's the risk both of Trump and some of their choices, such as Richard Grenell, that they could split Europeans if they start trying to flatter Trump rather than working together.
Right. So you mentioned working together within Europe. What does that mean on the ground? In other words, what would you like to see? Should Europe take a more cohesive approach to its own security and economics?
Yeah, if I may, as Americans say, cut to the chase here. I think we're facing a position where, not just because of Donald Trump, but because of the development of the front lines in Ukraine, and Ukraine valiantly resisting, but having to withstand now 33 months of invasion, we're moving towards, I think, a settlement, which would be on the lines that Russia's occupation of parts of Ukraine will have to be accepted, at least in the short term. But in return, Ukraine would be given assurances about coming into NATO or being on the path to NATO, and about coming into the European Union. I think we're moving towards a situation which is roughly that of where we were between West Germany and East Germany in the Cold War. If that is the case, if the US is on the sidelines over that, Europe is going to have to lead the effort to try to support Ukraine's security while recognizing that some of the country will be under occupation. It's going to have to support Ukraine's economy, and it's going to have to support Ukraine as an ally, not as a country which is just there being supported in part. Ukraine has to become part of the European community. And if there are those who stand against that, which there will be, like Viktor Orban in Hungary, like Robert Fico in Slovakia, you have to stand up to them as well. That Ukraine, or what is free Ukraine, has to be part of Europe and has to be defended as such.
Understood. Now, will Trump's victory, in your opinion, give momentum to far-right parties within Europe, do you think? I'm thinking in particular of the AfD in Germany.
There is no doubt that the far right across Europe have been bolstered by Trump's victory, and all you have to do is read their social media feeds or look at their statements, and you will see that. And it is not in Germany. You're absolutely right to highlight that AfD will try to use this, and that as we're at a very significant moment in Germany with the apparent collapse of the coalition and imminent elections, there is that prospect that AfD will try to surge to a leading position in the German political landscape. There is the National Rally in France under Marine Le Pen, who will be bolstered at a time when France really has a vacuum of cohesive leadership. It's pretty much Emmanuel Macron trying to lead as Macron, but not forging that coalition against the far right. But it's in the UK as well. If you go beyond Europe, the Reform Party under effectively a Trump employee, a man named Nigel Farage, is hoping that it can break the UK political system and break the UK Conservative Party. So that other message out of the European summit and going beyond it yesterday has to be about our own countries, whether it's Ireland, whether it's Poland, whether it's the Baltic states. We've got to deal with the domestic issues in a sensitive way in terms of dealing with housing, dealing with immigration, dealing with the economy, and dealing with the transport, and dealing it while always emphasizing decency, tolerance, and respect. In other words, that civic community that the far right threatens.
Understood. Professor Lucas, unfortunately, we're going to have to call it a day there, but thank you very much for sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks to you and all your great viewers.
Thank you. And that's all from us in this episode of World Talks. Don't go away. As always, lots more coming up. Bye for now.